The moonlight was obscured by clouds, and darkness shrouded the silent castle, where an atmosphere of mourning and fear permeated every corner. Black curtains and banners hung all around, and people dressed in mourning clothes stood by, weeping and wailing in deep sorrow. Although the mourners' faces were filled with grief, faint whispers could be heard from behind the hanging black curtains. Some attendees were whispering about the heir of the Lavrin family, pointing out that the recent turn of events was caused by the illegitimate son born to the late Duke and a lowly songstress. These rumors were dismissed as worthless nonsense by Nina, a 15-year-old girl and a member of the Black Knights. Nina suddenly stood up and asserted to the young man sitting before her that everything being said was pure slander, while he noted that her way of speaking was starting to resemble a person named Jean. The 16-year-old knight commander, Adrian Lavrin, smiled and acknowledged the fact that he was an illegitimate son. However, Nina insisted that they had no right to speak that way and emphasized that neither of them was responsible for the death of that woman's son. She then wondered inwardly if Adrian was annoyed and expressed a desire to teach those people a lesson. Deep in her heart, Nina recalled her relationship with the young master. He was her childhood friend and the heir to the Lavrin family, who had always been kind and gentle. She remembered that Duke Lavrin had 3 sons. These sons were the illegitimate Adrian and the Duchess's biological sons, Gerald and Aidan. By rights, Gerald and Aidan had a greater claim to the ducal title. However, since the Duke passed away before the succession was determined, Adrian also gained a claim. The issue escalated further with the sudden passing of the eldest son, Gerald, not long ago. Therefore, Nina seemed to know exactly what the Duchess would try to do now, as her gaze had been so venomous when she held her son's cold body. But what drove Nina mad was that Adrian, the target of all these schemes, was acting unusually calm. Although she admitted this calmness was one of his strengths, she wondered how he would survive in this cruel world with such a personality. For this reason, when the other knights returned to the Violet Forest border the day before, she decided to stay at Silver Lake Castle with Adrian, refusing her colleagues' attempts to dissuade her. Adrian had seemed a bit troubled by her childish behavior at the time, but she didn't care. Back in the present, Nina gripped the hilt of her sword, thinking to herself that she had an important mission to accomplish here. Just then, a knock came at the door, and Adrian granted the visitor entry. A servant entered the room and greeted Lord Adrian, which caught Nina's attention. Nina was puzzled by his sudden appearance, as he hadn't shown his face at all since they arrived at the palace. The servant informed her that he brought a message from the Duchess, which confirmed Nina's suspicions, and she narrowed her eyes watchfully. The servant went on to explain that the Duchess had prepared tea for Lord Adrian and requested that he come join her immediately, while from a distance, the Duchess's face showed a hint of a cold, cunning expression. In a spacious hall, the Duchess received Adrian, expressing her delight that he could arrive before the tea she had specially prepared for him grew cold. She then invited him to come forward and sit down quickly, while Nina stood alertly behind him. Adrian tried to reassure Nina, insisting to her that everything was fine. The Duchess began her speech, saying she had been thinking of them these past few days, then added that she remembered her late son Gerald as a smart and beautiful child. Adrian calmly replied that her son was indeed so, and she must be devastated by his death. The Duchess thanked him for his understanding, then added with a hint of a hidden smile that she had a favor to ask of him. But before the Duchess could finish her sentence, Nina moved with lightning speed and snatched the poisoned cup of tea from in front of Adrian. Adrian looked at her in shock, calling her name. Nina was absolutely certain. The determined look in her eyes reflected on the tea's surface. There was no doubt it contained a deadly poison. Without hesitation, Nina drank the contents of the cup in one gulp. Both the Duchess and Adrian were stunned, with Adrian shouting Nina's name as she staggered, a faint, triumphant smile on her lips. Her intuition was correct. The tea was indeed poisoned. As she held the empty cup, blood began to trickle from her mouth. The cup slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor, and she collapsed beside it. Adrian rushed to her side as she expressed an intense pain that surpassed all her expectations. Nina began to feel her throat burn and her stomach melt from the excruciating pain, wondering inwardly how Adrian had survived this poison before, and realizing this was not the first assassination attempt. As she lay on the floor, the thought of needing to help her young master flashed through her mind, but her body was completely numb and unable to move. With her last ounce of strength, she whispered an apology to her master. Adrian leaned over her, consumed by grief, and asked in a trembling voice why she had done it. The Duchess watched the scene with indifference, then demanded that Adrian leave the insolent guard and come have another cup of tea. As Adrian tried to get closer to Nina, two men grabbed him, preventing him from moving, one of them ordering him to return to the lady who was waiting for him. The two men forced Adrian into a chair, while Nina lay unconscious on the floor. At that moment, a mysterious purple energy began to emanate from Adrian, and the men holding him felt chains form from that energy wrap around their hands, wondering in terror what this power was. Adrian's eyes glowed red as he unleashed his power, summoning darkness to dispel his enemies. The guards let out agonizing wails as they struggled against the immense force, which materialized into a giant skeleton behind him. The skeleton, surrounded by a purple aura, appeared out of thin air and attacked the Duchess's men. The men, gripped by extreme fear, began to beg for their lives, claiming they had never seen anything like it. One of them shouted a warning to his lady that she needed to escape, as their attacks were useless against these monsters. But the Duchess remained seated, trembling slightly as she watched the scene unfold. In an angry tone, the Duchess yelled at Adrian, asking if he thought he could survive this behavior, as he held Nina's body, surrounded by dark creatures. The Duchess condemned him for doing all this for a mere girl. Adrian gathered his strength and answered her in a decisive tone, saying he would rather die than leave her. The scene shifted to that rainy night, where Adrian begged Nina not to do that to him, and she looked at him in confusion, barely able to understand what he was saying. Holding Nina, Adrian continued his plea. Nina returned to the painful reality, wondering in her fading consciousness if Adrian had survived, wishing she could see the look on his face, but she could no longer open her eyes. A contradictory sensation of hot and cold swept through her body, as if ice and fire were battling within her. She realized her guardian spirits, North Wind and Frost, were trying to slow the poison spread through her body. But everything began to slow down and grow cold, and she felt as if she were falling into the depths of a frozen river. Drowsiness overcame her, as if in a deep dream, and memories of the past began to flood her mind, making her wonder if her life was flashing before her eyes. In her final moments, those old days when it all began resurfaced. Things went back to the day Nina gained memories of another world. She had been living an ordinary, albeit poor, life, despite farming all day in a primitive village where they could barely make ends meet. As the young daughter of loving parents, she grew up in happiness and love. She was deeply saddened when her parents died in a carriage accident, but her tragedy did not end there. On her 5th birthday, memories of another world suddenly flooded in, as if she had entered the world of a novel. Her condition alarmed her family, who worried she was sick or that something was wrong with her. That world was a peaceful place where no one suffered from hunger or lost loved ones, and a gentle, beautiful life brought tears to her eyes. But soon, the memories of the two worlds intertwined in her mind, causing her to have a complete breakdown. She began to scream whenever anyone tried to get close to her, refusing her sister's touch as her sister anxiously asked the reason for her strange behavior. She screamed in her sister's face again, telling her not to touch her and asserting that she was not Nina. She declared that this was not her home and they were not her family. She then rushed out, demanding to be returned to her original world. Her behavior confused the village elders, who wondered how long she had been in this state, thinking she had gone completely mad due to her constant talk of another world. But one of them made an excuse for her. How could a small child who had witnessed her parents' murder remain sane? She sat alone under a large tree, muttering to herself that everyone was wrong and didn't know the truth, that she wasn't Nina, but was supposed to be someone else. Her solitude was interrupted by her brother's voice calling her name, expressing his gratitude for finding her, saying he was glad he found her before sunset. At that moment, Nina was shocked to notice his feet were bleeding. When she pointed to his bloody feet, he simply replied that he had accidentally lost his shoes. He then turned his attention to her, asking if she was hungry and urging her to hurry back for dinner. He told her that their sister, Barry, had bought a lot of her favorite candy and would be home soon. Sure enough, he saw his sister Barry returning from a distance and pointed her out to Nina. Barry rushed toward them, anxiously asking if Nina was all right and expressing her immense happiness for her safety. She embraced her gently, calling her their precious little baby, the prettiest in the world. She assured her that her existence was the source of the family's happiness. Those warm words, "Let's go home," our Nina, were like a light that dispelled the chaos in her mind, and she achieved victory in her internal struggle. It might sound strange to say she fought her memories and won, but it was a true victory. Once she overcame the pain, the memories of the other world became a part of her, and before she knew it, she had fully integrated with them. A while later, her brother called her from the doorway, asking about a rumor that she had helped the fruit shop owner solve some difficult problems. Her sister Barry, while combing her hair, expressed admiration for her intelligence, while Nina shyly replied that it was no big deal. Barry excitedly declared that Nina was so smart they should send her to a school in the city. But Nina knew in her heart that it was all thanks to the memories that had come from the other world. After her sister tied her hair with a red ribbon, her brother praised her beauty, saying the red ribbon suited her perfectly, and her sister playfully wondered if other colors would suit her too, suggesting she dye a blue ribbon for her next time. But Nina happily replied that she liked red, and in that moment she felt a surge of joy. She was happy. Until the blackness came and took everything. Screams echoed through the village, announcing the appearance of black monsters as someone shouted a warning for everyone to run. Nina immediately froze amidst the raging fire as a woman scolded her for standing still, and she heard cries for help from all directions. In the chaos, she heard adults asking where the children were, and another saying he needed to go get something. So she looked around with terrified eyes. She caught a glimpse of her siblings' charred hands in the burning wreckage and screamed in agony. After the blackness, bandits attacked the village, and she was now an orphan, sold to human traffickers. During her captivity, she felt cold and drowsy. In her despair, she heard a calm voice call her name, reassuring her that everything would be all right. Then a white, luminous being appeared before her, telling her not to be afraid, that she could move forward again. The voice told her that words from a heart would be heard sincerely by all, and they would easily discover how lovely and brilliant she was. For in her soul, the voice said before she abruptly woke up, wondering if she had dreamt of her brother and sister, or if it was just a hallucination. Although the memory was hazy, she felt a sense of lightness wash over her. She sadly whispered that she missed them. She decided not to give in to tears, as that would make her brother and sister sad, and she resolved to live for them as well. A few weeks later, she arrived at the Laverne estate. A maid greeted her in the kitchen, welcoming her as a new assistant and telling her to follow along to get acquainted. The maid complained that she had asked for someone older and smarter, but was sent a child instead. She then began to introduce her to the family, explaining that the family members were the Duke and Duchess, and warned her that the new Duchess was sensitive because she had just given birth to Master Gerald. She told her she probably wouldn't see the Duchess, as her work was confined to the kitchen. She then asked if she was fast at washing dishes and peeling potatoes, advising her to use her breaks to learn the details of the palace. Then, as if suddenly remembering something, the maid mentioned that the Duke had an illegitimate son named Adrian, and Nina was surprised to hear the name. She thought in shock, could this be Adrian Laverne, the second male lead from the novel she had read in her other world? She recalled the plot of the novel. A villain tried to destroy the world by summoning the fallen, king of spirits. So the Saintess heroine teamed up with the Archmage male lead and the second hero knight to defeat the villain and save the world. A terrible thought crossed her mind. Were all the tragedies that had befallen her related to that romance novel? The maid interrupted her daydream, asking if she was listening, and Nina quickly replied that she was. The maid advised her to be cautious and not to annoy the Duchess, adding that the Duchess particularly hated Adrian because he was an illegitimate son and told her to avoid getting involved with him if she could. She then told her to wait while she went to get some potatoes for her to peel. The kitchen was noisy and busy, and Nina answered affirmatively. Nina deduced that if Gerald had just been born, then Adrian must be around 9 years old, which meant the current events were happening much earlier than mentioned in the novel. But she quickly saw this as an opportunity. Since she knew what the future held, she could help the child. Just as her brother and sister had saved her life, she wanted to be someone who could protect others too. She made up her mind to use her memories to save Adrian, and that she herself must survive. Elsewhere, a mysterious black bird landed on a young boy's hand, telling him that a new child had arrived at the castle. Young Adrian looked at the bird coldly, saying he wasn't interested in the matter. He added, with a blank expression, that all humans were the same anyway. A few weeks later, Nina was immersed in her work in the kitchen, washing dishes. A cook ordered her to go out and get more eggs, and she responded immediately. Another cook sternly asked about her progress with the potatoes, and she assured him she would finish them right away. The head maid warned her that she must check the food sent to the Duchess 2 or 3 times, as they couldn't afford one of her tantrums, urging her to focus and hurry up. Nina hurriedly dealt with the barrage of orders in the crowded kitchen. After the hard work was over, she sat exhausted in a corner of the kitchen. A cook praised her for a job well done, telling her she could rest for an hour or two before serving the meal. Nina felt relieved. Although she was worried at first, she realized she was adapting to the situation faster than expected. Although everyone in the kitchen seemed tense from the hard work, sometimes shouting "hurry up," you said you could slack off in the kitchen. They were actually good people and even invited her to take a break with them for tea. Nina looked out the window, comforting her brother and sister in her imagination, saying she was fine and that their lovely little baby was working hard here too. But suddenly, the kitchen fell silent. The Duchess walked into the kitchen, and the cook gasped in fright. The head cook asked the Duchess why she had come when it was almost time for the meal. The Duchess coldly replied that she had heard Adrian hadn't been coming to meals lately, and then gave a clear order that no food was to be sent to him from now on. The cook was stunned and asked disapprovingly how he was supposed to eat then. The Duchess looked at her with an icy gaze, threateningly asking if she was the one looking after Adrian, and sarcastically offering to transfer her to the annex to serve him full-time. Nina watched the scene in shock, thinking that Adrian was just a child, and it was too cruel to starve him. The cook immediately backed down and apologized, saying she had misspoken, to which the Duchess coldly replied that she had indeed. The Duchess then glared at the cook and splashed a hot pot of something in front of her, warning her to watch her behavior. The scalding red liquid splashed on the floor, making a mess. The Duchess left the kitchen, leaving the servants in a state of shock and fear. After she left, the servants began to sigh, wondering if they really had to stop providing food for Adrian and lamenting what had happened. The maid felt dizzy, so Nina approached her and asked if the Duchess really hated young Master Adrian that much. The older maid confirmed her suspicions, saying that things would only get worse from now on. She explained that the Duchess had recently given birth to a son, but the Duke showed no interest in him at all. She added that there were rumors the Duchess had asked the Duke to disinherit Adrian last night, but he had ignored her. But strangely, as another maid commented, the Duke didn't seem to love Adrian either, as they were rarely seen talking to each other. This prompted the first maid to wonder why the Duke had brought his illegitimate son here in the first place if he was going to treat him like this. Despite hearing all this, Nina remained convinced that it was very cruel to let a child starve, so she wondered if she could secretly bring him food. The maid immediately scolded her, reminding her of the warning on her first day that the Duchess would punish her severely if she were caught, and added what would happen if the Duchess found out about her actions when the Duke already disliked Adrian. The head chef intervened, saying that was enough, and admitting they couldn't let a child starve, ordered Nina to quietly leave some food for him and come back, with a stern warning not to get caught. Nina excitedly replied that she understood. Nina headed to the castle's annex, where Adrian lived. As she walked down the desolate corridor, she wondered if she was in the right place, as the place looked deserted and terrifying and was not maintained. Nevertheless, she felt excited, wondering what Adrian looked like, remembering that he was described in a certain way in the novel. The novel described him as a perfect gentleman, so much so that his bad reputation as an illegitimate son seemed meaningless. He had an elegant smile, polite speech, impeccable aristocratic manners, and a magnetic voice. However, the heroine Fiona sensed a cold anger behind that perfect smile and meticulous attention, and for that reason, she could never fall in love with Duke Lavrin. Nina concluded that his harsh childhood had turned him into a terrifyingly gentle person, and thought that the Duchess she had met was truly cruel. She finally arrived at a room she assumed was his. She knocked on the door, and a voice from inside granted her entry. She carefully pushed the door open, asking for permission as she walked in with a bright smile, greeting the young master and announcing that she had brought him lunch. But young Adrian, who was sitting at his desk reading a book, didn't even look up. Nina was stunned, wondering if he was just ignoring her. She cleared her throat to get his attention, then excitedly told him that today's lunch menu was a very fragrant beef soup, promising he would be pleasantly surprised after tasting it. But Adrian remained silent, engrossed in his book. Nina felt a bit awkward about the situation, so she decided to leave the meal on his desk. As she left, she gave him another look, asking him to eat before the food got cold. After she closed the door, Adrian looked up from his book toward the door and muttered to himself, "Young master." In the kitchen, Nina worked so hard that a maid commented she was full of energy because she was young. But Nina felt exhausted, thinking that she had assumed knowing the future would make everything go smoothly, but that wasn't the case. She realized that because the Adrian in the original story was just a supporting character who suffered a lot, there was no need to explain his childhood in detail. Nina began to recall the bits and pieces of Adrian's life from her memories of the novel. He was abused during his childhood and was covered in bruises. Because of the Duchess's schemes, he was appointed commander of the Dark Knights to fight against the Black Monsters. Although the Duchess's attempt to poison him was unsuccessful, his health later deteriorated severely. Subsequently, the Dark Knights were annihilated due to the villain's plan. After that, Adrian killed all his family members and became the Duke, then neglected his domain, which fell into increasing disrepair, and his life was dedicated solely to hunting black monsters. Nina sighed, thinking his life was truly tragic, but she remembered that after the heroine appeared, the situation in the domain improved slightly. Thanks to the heroine discovering a specialty product within the ducal territory, the Lavrin family became very wealthy. Nina had thought at the time that after so much suffering, Adrian's life would finally become happy. But due to the poison his stepmother had given him, Adrian died miserably after the final battle. Nina was furious thinking about his fate, wondering why they had to exploit him like that, even if he was just a supporting character. While she could accept the idea of him being deprived of affection, she couldn't understand the reason for killing him in the end. Now that she had come to this castle, Nina decided not to let Adrian face this fate. Of course, she had no intention of being dragged into that depressing story. Maintaining the original plot was meaningless to her. The life she was living now was her real story. Her first step was to become his friend, but she wondered how to approach him. At that moment, a maid interrupted her thoughts. The maid jokingly warned her that she thought she had kneaded enough dough, and Nina discovered a huge pile of dough in front of her, screaming in surprise. Nina apologized for making so much, and the maids comforted her, saying it was fine and they would eat it. But the head chef smiled and suggested that perhaps they could share the dough with a hungry child. Hearing this suggestion, Nina's face lit up, as this was her chance to make the young master show even a hint of a smile. She was determined to win his heart through food. The next day, she went to Adrian, who was bandaging a wound in his room, and left a basket of fresh bread at his door. Adrian looked at the basket, then his gaze shifted to a note left by Nina, in which she mentioned she would leave things there so as not to disturb his reading, and invited him to call her anytime he wanted a hot drink. Meanwhile, Nina happily thought that no one could hate fresh bread and hoped to get one step closer to him this way. From then on, whenever there were leftover ingredients in the kitchen, Nina would try to make something for Adrian. A month later, she went to him with a new meal. She excitedly told him that today she had prepared creamy asparagus pasta with strawberries for dessert. She then suggested they go for a walk, as the flowers in the garden were blooming beautifully. But he remained silent as usual, so she left, encouraging herself that she wasn't the type to be easily defeated. 3 months later, in the summer, she brought him a baguette sandwich and a Capri salad. But she found him still the same, so she wondered in frustration if her plan was still not working. But she quickly regained her resolve and decided to keep trying until she succeeded. She continued to bring him food every day, whether it was lunch or a snack, trying to break down the wall of silence that surrounded him. Nina continued her attempts, proposing to bring him tea while he read, explaining that tea helps with sleep. 6 months later, in the autumn, she was still bringing him food regularly, but she noticed that he no longer opened the door, even when she knocked for a long time. She felt frustrated because 6 months had passed, and she felt that not only had they not grown closer, but they had become even more distant than when they first started. As she stood before his door, it suddenly opened, and Adrian walked out, which made Nina feel Very surprised, she tried to seize the opportunity, enthusiastically offering him today's meal, saying it was pumpkin risotto and that it smelled delicious because it was fresh from the oven and best eaten hot. But Adrian suddenly slammed the door in her face, leaving her looking bewildered. She sat on the floor, heartbroken, thinking it was another failed attempt and feeling helpless about the situation. Before leaving, she shouted that she would leave the food there and hoped he would enjoy it. Behind the door, Adrian listened to her with a sorrowful expression. Later, after finishing the dinner preparations, Nina sat in the kitchen with her colleagues, all enjoying the tea she had prepared. The head chef asked her why she was sighing as if it were the end of the world, and Nina sadly replied that there was someone she wanted to get close to, but he didn't seem interested at all, which made her very sad. The chef found it strange, saying that Nina was both kind and charming. So Nina explained that she had approached the person with sincerity, but she felt that he hated her, and it was the first time she had encountered such a situation and didn't know what to do. An older maid wisely told her that the time it takes for each person to open their heart is different, and if the walls around his heart are too high, he might not hear the voice calling to him from below. Nina asked her what she should do, so she advised Nina to wait patiently, asserting that if she was sincere, he would one day notice her feelings. Then the maid cheerfully added that sending an expensive bribe might not be a bad idea, and she handed Nina a bag of butter cookies, which were a rarity because butter was not abundant for them. Nina then realized why everyone was excited about the gift. It was truly precious. Nina thought to herself that the young master probably hadn't eaten something like this in a long time and decided to take it to him right away. On the way, she realized the senior servants were right, and she had indeed been too hasty. She hadn't started doing these things to get something in return, and she decided that if she could continue to help him quietly, they would become friends one day. When she arrived at the annex, she found all the lights were out. Using her ability to gather information, she remembered that today was his private swordsmanship lesson. She deduced that the lesson wasn't over yet and that the training ground was nearby. She decided to hide and watch quietly from a distance, but she stopped in her tracks when she heard an angry voice. She saw the swordsmanship instructor slap Adrian across the face, yelling at him and ordering him to repeat what he had just said, calling him an arrogant rogue. The instructor seemed drunk, and he asked Adrian if he had a problem with his training methods, and if he thought he was easy to bully just because he had a little to drink. Then he hit Adrian again, saying he had no charm, which was why his parents had abandoned him. Adrian, tired of the situation, wondered if he should just get rid of the instructor. He could have eliminated him with a wave of his hand, but he dismissed the thought, realizing that even if he got rid of him, nothing would change, or another terrible teacher would just take his place. He would still spend another exhausting day in the same darkness as before. But he reconsidered, because a strange crack had recently appeared in his dark life. A strange girl who, no matter how much he rejected her, always appeared before him and spoke to him kindly. Although he knew that what she showed was only temporary sympathy, and he deliberately treated her with an even colder attitude, he admitted to himself that whenever he saw her smiling face, he would feel a strange feeling inside. As the instructor continued to insult him, Adrian found himself suddenly thinking of that girl for some reason. Then he thought in despair that by now, she must have grown tired of someone like him. Just then, Nina interrupted him, screaming, "What in the world are you doing?" and struck the instructor hard on the head. The instructor screamed in surprise and pain, wondering which bastard had done it. Nina jumped on his back, complaining about the foul smell of alcohol coming from him and scolding him for beating a young child. The instructor roared in anger, asking her why she didn't get lost and if she had a death wish. Meanwhile, Adrian watched in shock, and the instructor also wondered who this crazy girl was. The instructor grabbed Nina, who screamed, identifying herself and warning him not to dare touch her young master. Then she turned to Adrian, telling him to leave things to her, run away immediately, and promising she would help him. But the instructor gripped her wrist tightly, mocking her and asking if she thought he was an easy opponent before throwing her aside. Adrian rushed to Nina, anxiously asking if she was okay. The instructor got up, cursing angrily, while Adrian remained by Nina's side, asking if she was hurt. The instructor stood up, grabbed his sword, and declared with finality that these ruffians didn't know their place and that he would teach them a lesson. At that moment, a dark aura enveloped Adrian, who held Nina tightly to protect her, then summoned the darkness, asking it to answer his call and devour his enemy. Chains formed from dark energy appeared and wrapped around the instructor, who screamed in terror, asking what this power was and crying for help in agony. Amidst his screams, the instructor confessed that he was only following the Duchess's orders, followed by a final, blood-curdling scream. His screams faded into the darkness, leaving only a pool of blood and the instructor's sword on the training ground. As Adrian knelt beside Nina, she realized with a shock that the power he had used was that of the spirits of shadow and darkness. She knew from a novel that Adrian had a contract with the spirits, but she never thought she would see it with her own eyes and was amazed that he had contracted with them at such a young age. Contracting with spirits required absolute faith in their existence and power, which meant that all spirit users had experienced desperate moments that forced them to believe in the unseen. She wondered to herself what horrors he must have gone through to reach this point. Adrian snapped out his daze, grabbed Nina with concern, and asked her again if she was okay and if she was hurt anywhere. But Nina, who was scared out of her wits by the scene before her, did not feel okay at all. Nina lowered her head in confusion, not knowing what to do, as she felt a strange sensation and didn't know how to react. Then she showed him the bag of crushed cookies, apologizing that the cookies she had brought for him were all broken. But he ignored the cookies and anxiously asked if she was hurt. His concern surprised him, and then he found himself holding her tightly, saying there was no need to worry about him. They sat together on a garden bench, and Nina worried that the swordsmanship instructor's disappearance would cause a commotion. Adrian reassured her, saying that he was always drunk, so people would just assume he had fallen asleep somewhere. She handed him a broken cookie, saying that eating a sweet butter cookie would make him feel better. Nina ate a piece, saying it was delicious and that every crumb should be eaten, while Adrian watched her quietly. Then Adrian suddenly spoke, saying that she had almost been seriously injured because of him, and he demanded that she not interfere in his affairs from now on. Nina, while eating a cookie, asked him why she couldn't interfere. She added that Adrian hadn't run away, but had saved her instead, which surprised him. Nina cheerfully told him that he felt the same way she did, and that he couldn't just stand by and watch what was happening either. Adrian took the cookie from her hand, seeming to want to say something, but Nina suddenly interrupted him, excitedly pointing to the sky and asking if he had seen the shooting star. Adrian looked at the sky, wondering what shooting star she was talking about, then replied that he hadn't seen it. Nina expressed her regret that he had missed it and told him that the next time he saw a shooting star, he must make 3 wishes. She closed her eyes and began to wish out loud, hoping there would be cake at the New Year's Eve party. Adrian watched her and smiled slightly. Nina asked him why he was smiling, insisting that cake was a very important matter, and he replied that he understood. Nina noticed that neither of them had eaten dinner properly and suggested bringing him something good from the kitchen tomorrow. Adrian thanked her and suggested they head back before they were discovered. Nina told him she would go on ahead, stopping to wish him good night before she left. Nina remembered the maid's words that if she was sincere, he would one day notice her feelings. She also remembered her scream when she protected him, thinking that friends shouldn't call each other young master, that she wouldn't let him be alone. So she decided that from now on, she had to call him Adrian. Nina happily reached out her hand to him, suggesting they go for a walk together tomorrow. Her hand trembled slightly, worried that as a kitchen helper, he might find her too presumptuous, but she held her ground. She was surprised when Adrian smiled and took her hand. He agreed to her suggestion, saying it sounded like a good idea. He watched her say goodbye, saying he would see her the next day, and she responded with pure joy. The next day, they went for a walk in a quiet, deserted corner of the garden. Their outing was simple, with only stale bread and a worn-out teapot, but the sun was warm and the wildflowers were fragrant. A yellow butterfly landed on Adrian's finger, and he watched it with a serene smile, while Nina watched him quietly from the side. And just like that, from that day on, they became friends. 4 years passed, and on a snowy winter day, Nina called out to Adrian from outside his frosted bedroom window. She excitedly held up a piece of cake, telling him that there was cake at the New Year's Eve party this year too. Adrian had grown into a handsome young man playing the violin, and he smiled, replying that it was good news. Nina happily savored the cake, declaring that butter and sugar were indeed the best, and marveled that there was cake again this year, concluding that her efforts of wishing on shooting stars every year had not been in vain. Adrian agreed, and then Nina mentioned that she remembered hearing a lot of rumors about the Black Knight Knights recently. She pointed out that the Black Knight Knights might be disbanded and a new squad formed, because the death rate against the black monsters had reached 50, and they were difficult to manage compared to the funds invested. Nina complained that if funding was the issue, the Duchess just needed to cut back on her extravagant spending, and then Adrian wouldn't have to use the worn-out items she collected for him. But Adrian calmly replied that he was content with the way things were. Then he looked at her gratefully and thanked her for always being by his side. Nina cheerfully replied that there was no need for thanks, as they were friends. As she spoke, she moved closer to get another piece of cake. However, Adrian wiped the cream from her face with his finger and licked it, smiling and saying that he liked cream too. Nina's face turned bright red at his action. Nina announced that she had to go back early because she had a lot of work to do to prepare for the New Year's Eve party. Adrian asked if she really had to go, expressing his wish for her to rest a little longer. Adrian wished for the blessings of the Great Spirit to overflow upon her. As Nina left, she responded cheerfully, also wishing him a year blessed by the Great Spirit. After stepping out into the cold, she felt a shiver and thought that she should at least bring an old blanket next time. As she was walking down the hallway, she suddenly bumped into someone. Nina immediately bowed and apologized profusely for bumping into them. The Duchess glared at her with a look of disgust, contemptuously asking how a rat could be in her house, showing extreme revulsion at the filthy sight. Two maids surrounded her, and the Duchess mockingly asked if she would become clean if they shaved her head and threw water on her, then ordered them to take her away. Nina was thrown out into the bitter cold, shivering violently, and one of the maids felt a pang of pity for her plight. The maids mocked her, saying this is what happens when you wander around the annex. Unable to bear the biting cold, Nina collapsed in the snow. After she lost consciousness, some kitchen servants found her, wondering in horror what had happened to her, and rushed to bring all the blankets from their rooms, massaging her hands and feet to warm her up. Adrian stood at the door of her empty room as the servants wondered how many hours she had been left out there, as she had nearly frozen to death. Adrian looked at the red hair ribbon that had fallen on the floor, then carefully pushed open her door and softly called her name. After hovering between life and death for 4 days, Nina finally woke up. The only silver lining in this incident was that the Duchess no longer paid her any attention, presumably thinking she was dead. Nina admitted to herself that the Duchess's assumption was correct. If it weren't for the help of the spirits of the North Wind and Frost, she would have surely died. But the problem wasn't her survival, but that Adrian had started avoiding her again, and it had been going on for a whole week. She thought angrily if he thought she would give up, and decided she had to make it so he couldn't hide. Nina hid under her blanket, and when Adrian entered the room, she suddenly spoke, saying she knew he was there, startling him. Adrian coldly told her that he didn't want to talk to her anymore and wanted her to leave. When Nina didn't move, Adrian called her name again, but she remained silent. Suddenly, Nina moved quickly, pulling him towards the bed and leaning over him. She commented that he was trying to ignore her again. She added that she knew he was doing this because he didn't want to lose her. But Nina replied that if things continued this way, he would lose her anyway, and in the worst way possible. Adrian told her that if she stayed by his side, she would get hurt, just like what happened before, and this time was no different. Nina asked him, so what, emphasizing that she just wanted to be by his side. She suggested they pretend not to know each other during the day, but could meet like this at night, and asked if that was acceptable to him. Adrian agreed to her suggestion, and Nina hugged him with joy. From then on, they only met at night when surveillance was lax. Adrian sometimes looked anxious, but whenever their eyes met, he would smile gently, as usual. That smile made her happy, and she had no idea what he was really thinking. 2 years later, on Adrian's 15th birthday, the Duke appointed him as the commander of the Black Knight Knights. Nina was shocked by the news, asserting that it was impossible and that sending him there was tantamount to sending him to his death. Although she had anticipated this based on the novel, she hadn't expected it to happen so soon. Just then, Adrian called her name. Adrian opened a small box containing all his savings. He told her it wasn't much, but it should be enough to pay the Laveran family for her freedom. Then, with a sad smile, he told her to leave the duchy. Nina realized that Adrian was already preparing to say goodbye to her. Adrian told her that his only concern was her. Nina sat at his desk, pondering his words. She held the box, realizing that Adrian still didn't know her very well. With a determined look, she thought to herself if he really wanted her to run away alone, asserting that would never happen. After Adrian left, Nina also prepared to leave the ducal castle. With the money from selling the pin Adrian had given her, plus her own savings and the money the senior kitchen staff had raised for her, she had enough for her journey. Everyone bid her a warm farewell, wishing her good health. Fortunately, joining the Black Knight Knights was not difficult. When submitting her application, she showed the official the mark on her hand, and the official was surprised and told her she was accepted. Nina endured 6 months of harsh soldier training and finally received her assignment to join the Black Knight squad, heading to her destination. Upon arrival, she wondered if this was the Violet Forest. One of the knights was surprised, asking why the place was named the Violet Forest when the trees looked normal in color. So Nina explained to him that they were still at the edge of the forest. She told him that the closer they got to the barrier, the deeper the violet color became, a color caused by the leaking toxins of the fallen Spirit King. Someone scoffed at the idea of a Spirit King's existence, wondering if anyone still believed that legend, while another told them to leave her alone since she was just a kid. But Nina knew it was true, just as described in the novel. She recalled the legend. Long ago, the gods entrusted the world to the great spirits and crossed the glass sea. And one of the Spirit Kings rebelled against the great spirits. The rebellion was suppressed by the other Spirit Kings, and the fallen Spirit King was shattered and fell to the earth. As a result, the fallen creatures known as the Black appeared on the land. For this reason, the Black Knight Knights guarded this place, preventing those monsters from descending upon villages and harming humans. After the carriage arrived, everyone was told to get out. There was a large group of new recruits, and some veteran knights wondered how many of them would survive. Nina felt excited, as this was the first time she had been away from Adrian in a long time, and she wondered how happy he would be to see her. She saw Adrian from a distance and noticed some knights whispering about how he had become a commander at such a young age. Nina sighed when she saw her new colleagues mocking her and her age, but she pushed past them and ran towards Adrian. She waved her hand and shouted "Young Master," announcing her arrival and drawing everyone's attention. Although Adrian's expression looked stiff, she was sure it was one of happiness. But he coldly asked her, "Why are you here?" and she cheerfully replied that she had applied as a new recruit. Adrian sighed and asked her again why she would do that. Adrian told her that this wasn't a place one could come to on a whim, and that she didn't even know how to hold a sword. Nina tried to interrupt him, but he continued, warning her that fighting the Black meant she could die. She cut him off, saying there was something she had been hiding from him all this time. She revealed to him that she was a spirit user, just like him. Adrian asked in surprise if this had just started yesterday, so she told him it was since before she met him, and that her older sister and brother were both killed by the Black. She explained that she didn't want to recall those painful and sad memories, which was why she had hidden it until now. But now she was trying to accept everything because she had someone she wanted to protect. Nina smiled and told him that life was a series of hardships and sorrows, and that finding joy and happiness within it was entirely up to her. Therefore, she had come here to find her happiness and told Adrian there was no need for him to feel guilty. She added playfully that she just needed to work harder on her swordsmanship, and that during training, they said she had a talent for it. Adrian asked if she intended to stay by his side, and she assured him she would. Adrian warned her with a serious expression that she might regret it, but she replied firmly that she would never regret it. Adrian smiled, admitting that he couldn't win against her. Then he gave her a warm hug, welcoming her and expressing how much he had missed her. After that, Adrian and Nina worked hard to make the headquarters of the Black Knight Knights a livable place. Adrian reformed the system and training methods, while she took on the cleaning duties. She complained about the filthy bedding and terrible food, saying that if she were them, she would want to die. Therefore, she did her best to give the people living in despair something to look forward to for tomorrow, running around with food and loudly asking who was going to miss mealtime. The people who seemed like they would never change began to ask about the next day's menu and greet each other warmly. 2 years later, more people chose to voluntarily stay with the Black Knight squad. One evening, a knight named Jean asked Nina about her relationship with the commander, as he had been curious for a long time. He wanted to know if their relationship was a romantic one. Nina looked at Adrian in silence for a moment. Then she put her arm around Adrian's shoulder and cheerfully declared it was just friendship. Jean, however, sarcastically commented that it was a lie. Jean complained that if their relationship was just friendship, it meant he had no friends, to which Nina retorted why he was blaming his unpopularity on her. Jean was angered by her provocative response. Another night laughed, saying there was never a quiet day. Nina felt she had gained a new family, not just colleagues. But just a short while ago, a letter from the Laverne estate had arrived. One of the knights told them that the letter said that young Master Gerald had passed away. Nina immediately realized that the incident where Adrian was to be poisoned was about to happen. She was determined to stop it at all costs. Therefore, she accompanied Adrian to the funeral. As expected, the Duchess summoned Adrian. Nina had imagined a heroic scene where she would push away the poisoned food and shout, "It's poison." But what actually happened was that she drank the poison without realizing it. However, she concluded that if she hadn't drunk it, she wouldn't have been able to get out of that situation anyway. Nina's consciousness returned to the moment she drank the poison. She didn't remember much of what happened after, only feeling an extreme cold and drowsiness. In her unconscious state, she felt someone constantly calling out to her. Adrian's voice echoed in her ears, calling her name, asking if she was still alive, and pleading with her not to leave him. Adrian realized her breathing was very faint, and she would die if this continued. As the rain poured down, Adrian made a desperate decision, thinking that if he dived directly into the darkness, he had no time to think, even though he had never tried it before. He summoned the darkness, asking it to take him to a safe zone where there were no roads and no light. Adrian teleported through the darkness, suddenly appearing in front of one of his knights. Jean was surprised to see the commander in such a disheveled state, and asked if he had run all the way and what had happened. Adrian anxiously asked for Dr. Kirill's location, then told him that Nina's life was in danger. The knights gathered around Nina, who was lying on a bed, and Kirill, the doctor of the Black Knight Knights, asked what on earth had happened. Adrian told him that Nina had drunk the poison for him. He added anxiously that she had vomited a lot of blood. He felt she was no longer breathing, and that her body temperature was extremely low despite him having run as fast as he could. Jean and the vice commander, Lewis, tried to calm him down, assuring him that Nina was strong and would be fine. After examining her, Carol commented that her condition was interesting, as she had lowered her own body temperature to slow the spread of the poison. Carol assured them that he believed she would survive, then had someone fetch some herbs from his greenhouse. In a world of unconsciousness, Nina felt at peace, thinking that perhaps resting peacefully like this would be nice. But suddenly, excruciating pain swept through her entire body. She began to writhe and scream in agony. So Carol ordered Adrian to hold down her hands and feet tightly. Carol explained that as her bodily functions returned to normal, she would feel a pain as if she were being stabbed all over, and she had to overcome it. Her agonized screams continued to fill the room. Adrian held her hand tightly, calling her name, desperately trying to help her endure the pain. Nina woke up on a sunny morning, stretched, and yawned. She said she had slept well, but suddenly screamed from the pain she felt in her body. Carol entered the room and sarcastically commented that she was already causing a ruckus the moment she woke up. She, in turn, complained that her body ached as if she had been beaten up badly. When Nina saw him, she asked where they were, and he told her they were in a village near the Violet Forest, and that he had come here to focus on her treatment. Nina wondered if this meant Adrian had carried her all the way from the ducal castle, which Carol confirmed, adding that it had happened a week ago. Carol, he commented that he never thought he'd see such an expression on the commander's face in his life. Then he chided Nina for making people worry, and she replied that she had her reasons and that she was against harming the patient. Kirill told her that the poison had damaged her mouth, throat, and stomach, and her other organs were not functioning properly. He assured her he would do his best, but told her she would need at least 6 months of recovery before rejoining the order. Nina grumbled that 6 months was too long, but soon she flashed a peace sign with a bright smile and declared that 2 months would be enough. 2 months later, Nina indeed returned to the Black Knight Knights headquarters. Her colleagues greeted her with surprise, wondering how she returned in just 2 months and if she was really okay. She assured them she was fine and told them Kirill himself had approved her return, though he kept complaining that he didn't know if he was treating a human or a bear. Jean excitedly suggested throwing a party to celebrate her return, but Nina teased him, saying he just wanted to use her as an excuse to drink. As his plan was exposed, Nina gave a mischievous smile while Adrian watched them from a distance. but he paid them no mind, as he was talking about something with a subordinate at the time. That night, Nina lay in bed feeling nauseous, wondering if it was too soon to drink. She remembered that Adrian didn't come in the end, saying he had things to attend to, and she wondered if he was okay. Suddenly, she heard a noise outside her room and wondered who was there. Adrian entered the room, and Nina, surprised by his presence, asked if something was wrong. Adrian directly asked her why she did what she did when she knew beforehand that it was poisoned. Nina asked if he was angry. Adrian looked at her, pondering to himself. If he was angry, then why? He coldly retorted, "Should I be angry?" He continued sarcastically that a loyal subordinate drank poison for him, and he should praise her for it. He added that he should celebrate having such a loyal subordinate. Nina realized he was truly angry and asked him to calm down. Adrian walked toward her, pleading with her not to speak like that. He said sorrowfully, "Don't speak as if you're just brushing it off, as if it all meant nothing to you." He took back his words, but admitted he knew he shouldn't have spoken that way. He admitted that this time, too, he could only watch her suffer. He remembered how he ran through the forest in the rain, holding her, and how scared he was of losing her just like that. He said he was terrified she would leave him. The truth was, he knew that if Nina stayed by his side, she would continue to get hurt. He admitted he shouldn't have let her join the night order when she first came, that it was all his fault. He felt he had taken advantage of her compassion. He quietly hugged Nina, and Nina softly called his name. Nina told him she knew the tea was poisoned, just as he had said. The metallic taste was too strong to ignore. Adrian angrily asked her why, but she cut him off, saying the reason was obvious. She said she did it because he was going to drink it, adding that he had also known everything from the start. That was why he had deliberately stopped her from checking the tea first. In a firm tone, Nina warned him to be prepared from now on. If he was going to drink poison, she would drink it for him. If he planned to take a knife, she would take it for him. Adrian looked at her in silence, then said that if he had made that choice, it would have been. Nina cut him off, saying she knew it was part of his calculation. He thought drinking the poison was the only way out of the predicament, as he had some resistance to poison, and even if he collapsed, it would lessen the Duchess's surveillance on him. She told him she understood his plan, and that she didn't do it to save some pitiful young master. Nina said with a laugh that while she loved him, she was no fool. She knew her young master was no pure and gentle little lamb. Adrian felt a bit embarrassed, thinking that she knew everything and still chose to stay by his side. Nina asked him to sit, saying she also had something to say. She asked him not to harm his own body, no matter what he planned, worrying what would happen if he died young, and told him she would be very sad if he died after only doing good for others. Adrian gently asked her what about her. He wondered to himself what he would become if she weren't around. Nina smiled and assured him she would be careful too, asserting that this was the best promise the Black Knights could make in this forest full of black monsters. She held out her hand and said he must keep this promise. In their world, people press their palms together when making a promise. As they pressed their hands together and looked into each other's eyes, she assured him he must keep the promise completely, and he agreed. The next day, Nina felt dizzy during training. Jean noticed she didn't look well and suggested she cancel her patrol for the day, but she replied that she just hadn't slept well. After Adrian left the previous day, Nina thought to herself while resting that event number 3 had passed safely, but she remembered that the next event was the annihilation of the Black Knights. She tossed and turned anxiously in bed, thinking that they had just managed to get the Night Order's affairs in order, only to now face annihilation. She felt this was too much for a side character and wondered what on earth would happen. In her anxiety, she fell asleep and had some strange dreams. She dreamed of a giant black monster destroying the fortress, and in another dream, a black monster devoured her. The next morning, she asked Jean if the Black Knights were to be wiped out, what he thought the reason would be. Jean was surprised by her ominous words and asked if she had a nightmare, to which she replied it was something like that, and she felt very uneasy. Jean said he couldn't even imagine it, but he thought the reason might be a lack of money. Nina wondered why money would suddenly be an issue. Jean explained that their weapons contained less than 10 spirit stone steel because it was too expensive. With these weapons, they couldn't even pierce the skin of high-level black monsters, and if they were attacked by a horde of them in this state, they would surely be wiped out. Nina grew more anxious, saying it was too realistic. So Jean chided her for panicking after asking him. Jean tried to comfort her, saying that attacks by high-level black monsters were rare, so they would be fine, and besides, There was nothing they could do about the money problem anyway. He added jokingly that unless they discovered a steel mine or something, there was no hope. Nina was struck by the idea of a mine. Nina suddenly remembered that the female lead, Fiona, had already discovered a mine in the Violet Forest. Not just any mine, but a Mayon-chol or mine, which was even better than spirit stone steel. But the novel only mentioned that the kidnapped female lead discovered it by chance, so she didn't know the exact location. She considered searching the forest alone, but if she encountered a high-level black monster, she would surely die. She wondered if there were other ways to get money, because even if she postponed the search for the Mayon-chol, their situation would improve significantly if they could at least get spirit stone steel weapons. She resolved that she must do everything she could, as she couldn't let the Black Knight Knights be annihilated, nor could she lose any more family. While wandering in the forest, Nina suddenly tripped and Jean caught her, warning her to be careful. Nina noticed a fallen tree oozing oil and wondered what it was. Jean was surprised that oil was coming out of a tree, but Nina immediately recognized it as an oil tree and told him that if this oil was used in lamps, it would be more fragrant and brighter than cheap candles. Jean was amazed at how knowledgeable she was, so she replied in confusion that she somehow just knew, while thinking to herself that it was because she had read it in the novel. She remembered that the female lead, Fiona, had made a fortune by making lamps from oil trees and transparent berries she had found by chance. Nina exclaimed excitedly, saying she had found a solution. Nina announced that she was going to make money from this discovery. Nina went to see Kirill to ask about the medicinal herbs that grew in the Violet Forest. She told him she planned to grow them in large quantities and sell them at the market, asking if it was feasible. Kirill replied that it was a good idea, as medicinal herbs were always in short supply, especially those that only grew in the Violet Forest. Kirill began to examine his herbs, pointing out that this and that herb were in high demand. Nina pointed to the oil tree and said its oil was very fragrant and would be very popular if sold for lamps, and Kirill wondered if this was true. Kirill commented, "As a doctor, she sure knows a lot." Nina replied that she was interested in business. Kirill told her that in any case, trying to save money was a good idea, as the recent rumors about the ducal territory were bad, and supplies might be cut off soon. Nina asked what kind of rumors, so he told her they had a lot of debt and creditors were coming and going. He added that the Duke's Guard Knights had been losing one after another in exchange matches, and there were even rumors they wouldn't participate in the Imperial Championship at all. Nina wondered what an exchange match was, so he explained it was a competition between knight orders representing various families. The competition was for the right to use the Crystal Well, located between the Lauren families and Count Ravis territories. Nina realized they had lost last year as well, meaning they had been defeated for 2 consecutive years, which would make farming and animal husbandry difficult. Nina thought to herself that Kirill must have informants all over the territory, and then she asked him. Nina thought Kirill's skills as a doctor were excellent, and he could have gone anywhere, but she wondered why he stayed in such a small knight order. Nina directly asked him why he stayed with the Black Knight Knights, and he replied that the reason was obvious. He told her with a terrifying smile that here, he could dissect humans as he pleased. Nina was terrified by his answer. She sighed. She said there wasn't a single normal person in this order, so Kirill asked if she knew she was included in that description, and she replied of course. Daily life in the order was always the same: training, breakfast, patrolling the Violet Forest, and on top of that, gathering useful plants. While gathering plants, Nina found what she was looking for. She dug up all the plants the original female lead had discovered in the Violet Forest and planted them in her own private garden. She showed Jean some transparent berries, telling him they would soon be the star product of their business, but he didn't understand what they were. Nina remembered that Fiona had also made the Lauren territory prosper this way, so she felt it was a good thing to plant them in advance in the garden she had pestered Lewis into getting for her. Of course, she didn't know when the young master would become the Duke, but she wondered to herself if Adrian would really kill his family with his own hands. She was furious thinking about what the Duchess had done, but if he would be labeled a traitor for killing his half-brother and father, she didn't want that. She would rather kill them herself than let him bear the name of a traitor. Then she wondered if this meant he wouldn't become the Duke, since the third young master was still alive, and she considered the possibility of a rebellion or a coup, but ruled it out for lack of justification. Her thoughts were interrupted by Adrian's voice, asking if she was trying to get all this done in one day. He told her he'd heard she was running around as if trying to plunder all the herbs in the Violet Forest, so he wondered what was going on and came to see. Nina told him the weather was starting to warm up, and if they diligently planted the herbs now, they would grow lushly in the summer and could be harvested in the fall. Adrian offered to help and asked where to start. Nina told him she had already dug the holes, and they just needed to move the herbs and seedlings over. She asked him to hold them carefully so as not to damage the roots. After finishing the work, Adrian commented that it was harder than he had thought. Nina asked if he felt satisfied now that it was done, and he agreed. Nina told him that one day, when he became the Duke, she would use this to revitalize the territory. Adrian seriously asked Nina if she wanted him to become the Duke. She whispered to him that it was a secret, but she told him that all she wanted was Adrian's smile. Adrian laughed and said she only wanted difficult things. Nina wondered what was so difficult about it, since he was right here. Adrian replied that she was right, he was right here. Nina cheerfully told him she had a plan, even if he didn't become the Duke. She said she would sell tons of products through a trading company, they would get rich, and then they could eat lots of cake every day. Adrian simply agreed. Nina excitedly added that she would also change the bedding to softer ones and replace all the old weapons. Adrian agreed. Adrian told Nina he would soon form an elite unit to deal with high-level black monsters. He explained that he would single out and categorize those with good skills, because without competition, people's levels would degenerate. But Nina wondered, wasn't it hard enough not to degenerate when every day was a survival crisis? Adrian replied that they couldn't just stop at survival. They had to look ahead, and setting goals was his job as commander. Then he suggested she also apply for the elite unit, adding that members would get long coats and that she would surely look good in one. Nina said excitedly that she would grow her garden and he would develop the Black Knight Knights. She held out her small hand and said she was counting on him from now on, and he touched her hand and said he was counting on her too. After that, the test to select the elite knights began. The candidates who passed the test were announced at the founding ceremony, but in the end, fewer than 10 elite knights were chosen, and both Jin's and Nina's names were on the list. When the long coats exclusive to the elite knights were distributed, Nina was captivated by their beauty, but when she tried one on, it was too big for her, which drew laughter from Jean and teasing from Lewis. Lewis tried to console her by saying she was still growing and would fit into it soon. Nina muttered for him to just wait and see. As the seasons passed, they all got injured and broke down at times, relying on each other for support. 2 years later, the plants Nina had planted bore abundant fruit. Now 17 years old and an elite knight, Nina carried a basket of fruit, satisfied that the amount was enough. She looked at the vibrant garden, thinking it was the result of 2 years of hard work. She felt proud of herself and kept imagining Adrian praising her for her hard work. She muttered to herself that she had to quickly show the young master her achievements from this period. As time passed, the supplies that were sent became worse and worse, but thanks to the garden, they had become largely self-sufficient. Nina thought her plan to make the Black Knight Knights rich was going perfectly. At least that's what she thought until she saw that scene. She saw a giant crystal pyramid floating in the air, surrounded by mysterious chains and runes, and realized they were in trouble. She wondered if there were any other traces, but saw nothing. She thought to herself that no one would come to this cursed forest anyway, except for crazy cultists. Realizing they were truly in a bind, she screamed in terror. She remembered that the Black Knight Knights were annihilated because of the villain's plan, and Adrian would suffer irreversible emotional trauma. She was 100% sure this was that event. She wondered in despair what to do, feeling she had to stop it no matter the cost. She saw the Black Knight Knights as her family and decided she couldn't lose her family again. But she blamed herself, wondering how they had slipped in and why she had been so careless. Nina regained her composure, judging that the event hadn't truly started yet, so she had to go back and inform them first. She tried to think on the bright side. Since she had discovered it early, they should be able to stop it. But her positive mindset quickly vanished when she realized the situation was actually lucky and things weren't that bad yet. Suddenly, she felt a wave of dizziness, and the surroundings all changed. She found herself suspended in the air by plant vines and realized she had fallen into a trap. It was a trap set by a plant-type black monster, and she wondered if venom was being spread with every rustle of the giant flower's leaves. She decided to hold her breath for as long as possible, but didn't know how long she could last. She grabbed her sword, knowing she had to end this quickly. She summoned the spirit of the north wind, asking it to blow everything away with the speed of lightning. Then she summoned the spirit of frost, calling for its sharp breath that could freeze and sever all things to appear. With the help of the spirits, she managed to sever the vines entangling her. She delivered a fatal blow to the heart of the giant flower. However, she fell hard and injured her ankle, feeling a sharp pain. She looked sadly at the herbs she had collected, now all ruined, and she mourned the loss. But she quickly composed herself, realizing there was no time to be sentimental and that she had to hurry. She tried to stand and walk, but faltered due to her injury, yet she decided she had to tell them quickly. She summoned the north wind again, asking it to carry her on its currents. She appeared before Jean, who was startled to see her. Jean asked in shock what had happened to her, and Nina gave a weak smile. Jean chided her for going into the forest alone, reminding her that the rule was to move in pairs, a rule even beginners followed. Nina apologized, saying she would listen to his lecture later. She asked him to tell everyone that someone had drawn a magic circle at the barrier. Before she could finish talking about notifying the temple, blood started to flow from her nose. She lost consciousness as Jean screamed her name. The knights gathered by her bedside, and Kirill assured them she would recover from this level of poison soon. But he added that the ankle injury was a problem and she wouldn't be able to fight for a few weeks. Hearing this, Adrian let out a sigh of relief, while Jean wondered just how deep into the forest she had gone alone, deciding to scold her harshly once she recovered. Adrian asked Jean if he had checked the magic circle Nina mentioned. Jean replied yes, and that when he went to scout, he found a magic circle he had never seen before. He explained that it seemed dangerous to touch it rashly, so he left it as it was, and Adrian praised him. Adrian pondered the matter of the magic circle at the barrier, concluding that only one person would do something like this now. Adrian thought of the Duchess, who had been quiet since her son's funeral, and he wondered if she was starting to make her move again. As he stood by Nina's bed with the knights, he thought that they still didn't know the enemy's goal. He added that the problem with the barrier was beyond their ability to handle alone. So they all agreed they must notify the temple. Meanwhile, Nina was in a dreamlike state, wondering where she was as the place felt familiar. She heard a voice comforting her, saying everything would be all right and that she would definitely see them again. The voice told her that if she did that, Nina woke up, puzzled by the dream. She stretched and said she had slept well. But she suddenly cried out in pain, and Kirill smacked her on the head. She protested, asking why he would hit a patient, and saying she was against violence. Kirill sarcastically told her that only her mouth was still alive and told her to eat her lunch. He chided her, saying everyone's hearts couldn't take what she was doing now, and wondered how many times this had been. Kirill told her to stay put because her ankle was injured, and that the fortress would be quiet today as there were no patrols. Nina wondered why. Kirill explained that she had discovered the problem with the barrier, and after they notified the temple sent a priest. Now the commander and the elites were following the priest to inspect the barrier. Nina was relieved that the temple had acted so quickly. She thought this was good because she didn't know much about barriers and was worried about what to do. She believed the problem would be easily resolved. She anxiously stopped him and asked if all the elites had gone out. Kirill replied that he didn't realize how things would end or what might ultimately happen. Nina felt extreme fear and got out of bed. Kirill shouted her name, but she was already up and limping away. She thought in denial, how could I have forgotten that fact? The final boss in this story is. She ran, tried to ignore the pain. Suddenly, a huge explosion occurred in the direction of the barrier, and Nina screamed Adrian's name. She remembered that the final boss in this story was the high priest. Nina and Kirill looked out the window in the direction of the explosion, and Kirill wondered what had happened and if that could be where the barrier was. Nina asked Kirill to run to the main fortress and help evacuate everyone first. Kirill asked in shock if she was planning to go to the forest, warning her that she could die in her current state. Nina looked at him and pleaded for him to live. Kirill sensed her determination and decided to trust her. Nina used the power of the wind to rush toward the forest. Meanwhile, the barrier had shattered, and black monsters began to pour out in large numbers. Jean was fighting fiercely, cursing the situation and wondering why the black monsters kept coming. He realized that his and Louis's strength alone was not enough, especially after everyone else had fallen. He wished for even just one more person to help them. Just then, Nina appeared, summoning her spirit powers, furious wind blades, and biting frost, to land a heavy blow on one of the monsters. Jean was surprised to see her, and Nina apologized for being late. She immediately asked him where the young lord was, and Jean pointed to a nearby location. Nina ran over, shouting his name. She found him sitting on the ground, with Louis beside him trying to wake him up, confirming he was still breathing. Louis shouted a warning for Nina to watch her back. A monster attacked her, but she managed to block it with difficulty. Nina felt that chaos had taken over the place. In the midst of battle, she screamed at the monsters not to get in her way. She used the power of ice to finally kill the giant monster. However, she felt she wasn't in as good a condition as she had expected. She saw that only one side of the barrier was broken, but she realized that if the other side broke too, even more black monsters would pour in. If that happened, no one would survive. She noticed the barrier was shaking and wondered if that meant. Then Nina ordered everyone to gather. Nina summoned her old allies, the North Wind and Frost. She called for the silence that consumes all, for the perfect shield of winter to appear. A giant ice barrier formed, but Jean thought anxiously, wondering if the poisonous gas would kill them the moment they breathed. Nina rushed to Adrian, anxiously asking if he was okay. Adrian was leaning against Louis, barely conscious. He looked at Nina and asked how she was, if her leg was okay. Nina replied that she wanted to ask him the same question. Adrian tried to say he was fine, but his body was shaking, so Nina anxiously asked if he was really okay. Louis told her that Adrian was closest to the explosion, and it was a miracle he survived. Nina wondered which explosion he was talking about. Adrian struggled to explain that there was a religious extremist hidden in the temple. The priest who came to inspect the barrier told them there was a problem and asked Adrian to come closer to help. Adrian listened to the priest chanting without any suspicion, completely unaware that it was a spell to trigger an explosion. With the explosion, a potent poison spread, and the knights fell instantly. Adrian felt guilty, saying it was all his fault that he had made such a foolish judgment. He repeatedly apologized to Nina, but she smiled and told him it wasn't his fault. She held his hand and assured him she would take care of it. She ordered Jean and Louis to take the young lord and retreat from here. Jean flatly refused, saying it was absurd to leave her behind, but she told them there was no time for a long debate. She explained that the ice shield wouldn't last long. Unfortunately, with just her spirit powers of frost and the north wind, she couldn't reseal the barrier, but she told Adrian she had a very good idea and asked him to trust her. He concluded that she was going to summon a higher-level spirit. She explained that the barrier hadn't completely shattered yet, so if they borrowed the power of a high-level spirit, they could stop the situation from worsening, and that this was the wisest decision at the moment. He was moved by her idea, but Jean doubted if a spirit user could really do it. Adrian explained that to summon an uncontracted spirit, a corresponding price must be paid. He looked at Nina with concern, realizing that she was planning to offer her own body as a sacrifice. Nina replied with a sad smile that she had no other choice, and this was the only way now. She said she didn't want them all to die here together, but Jean and Louis objected, saying that was out of the question. Adrian intervened and said he would do it himself, as he was also a spirit user and could use this method. He ordered everyone to evacuate with Nina, but he couldn't stand steady due to his injuries and nearly fell. Luckily, Nina caught him in time. She mocked him, saying that he couldn't even stand properly now because of the poison. Holding him, she told him that he was the young master, and she was the only one who could do this. Adrian told her that at least he wouldn't leave her alone, and if they were to die, they would die together. But she insisted that he leave, as they needed someone to report what had happened. She asked him what would happen to the knights who had abandoned their commander and fled if he died. Adrian hesitated. She pleaded with him to fulfill his duty. She added that staying alive was also a responsibility, and preserving one's life was an obligation. Adrian angrily refused, thinking that he didn't need any of that. What did other people's lives matter, and what meaning would his life have without her? He added that if he lost her, he would lose everything. Adrian begged her not to try and leave him behind, but he thought that saying these things would only make it harder for her. Just then, the ice shield Nina had created shattered. Louis shouted a warning that the commander had to evacuate. Adrian tried to stop Nina, but she had already made up her mind. Nina stood alone before the shattered barrier. She smiled at them and made a victory sign to bid them farewell. She gave one last command to the north wind to carry everyone to safety, then prepared for battle, saying it was time to give it her all one last time. She faced the giant black monster rushing toward her. She sighed, saying the monster was too impatient, that it would have to go back sooner or later anyway, so it should have come out a little slower. Nina began to summon the high-level spirit, praying to the burning flames and the heat that incinerates and explodes everything, calling upon the raging, endless inferno. She also declared that she would offer her body, blood, and bones as a sacrifice. She felt a massive and terrifying presence and let out a smile. She thought to herself that by now, Adrian should be far away in a safe place. She was sure that no matter what happened, Lewis and Jean would protect him in her stead. If that was the case, she could be at peace. Nina continued, declaring she would offer her soul to the altar of the eternally burning fire. She commanded the crimson flame to descend. She thought that an ending like this wasn't so bad. A massive burst of light erupted, and she felt satisfied. The light was like the sun, so bright that it was impossible to tell day from night, and it could be seen clearly even from the distant edge of the violet forest. Adrian and his comrades were transported away by the power of the wind. Adrian fell to his knees, gasping for breath. He thought that a spirit being unable to maintain its power meant its master had passed away. Adrian angrily slammed his fist on the ground, shouting that he had clearly told her not to sacrifice herself. He remembered all the times Nina had put herself in danger for his sake. Lewis suggested returning to the fortress first. He added that they needed to check the commander's injuries and that Kirill was there too. They had to go back to the Black Shield Fortress. Adrian refused to go back and ordered them to go directly to the village to prepare to activate the Great Barrier, explaining that many black monsters had been released and they had to act quickly. Lewis reluctantly agreed, but Jean protested that he didn't understand what they were talking about. Jean insisted that they should first go back there to see if Nina was still alive. Adrian cut him off, saying that if Nina was safe, she would return. He added confidently that if she were alive, she would definitely come back to him. Jean looked at the intense light coming from the explosion site, thinking how that could be possible. Adrian lowered his head in sorrow, thinking that without Nina, his life was over. So he swore that those who took Nina from him would also lose everything. That night, only 3 members of the Black Knights survived. Adrian returned to the Black Shield Fortress and tried to activate the Great Barrier that protected the entire village. Meanwhile, Jean and Lewis dealt with the black monsters that had escaped from the Violet Forest and helped Kirill evacuate the villagers to safety. After the long night ended, they returned to the forest. They found a shining sword stuck in the pyramid, with gold and silver symbols shimmering with light, sealing the shattered barrier. The 3 of them stood sadly before this magnificent sight. Meanwhile, a strange rumor spread through the village. On that desperate night, when the barrier shattered and poisonous gas and black monsters were everywhere, someone had seen the sun. The light was so dazzling that no one could look at it directly, and that brilliant existence, like the sun, had saved them. Nina woke up in a green field full of flowers. She wondered where she was, as the place felt both familiar and dear. She heard a voice calling out to her. She saw her older brother and sister walking toward her. When they called her name, she couldn't believe they were right in front of her. Her brother told her he had been looking everywhere for her to give her a gift and placed a flower crown on her head. Her sister said it suited her perfectly, saying how pretty their little sister was. The brother added that he couldn't tell her apart from the flowers. Nina started to cry. Her brother asked why she was crying and offered to carry her on his back, while her sister offered to hug her. The sister playfully held her, thinking to herself when she had gotten so big and heavy. Nina told them she was crying because she was so happy, but she knew this was just a dream. Whether it was a dream or a revolving lantern of memories before death, she didn't care. She wanted to tell them something. Nina told her brother and sister that she was grateful they loved her so much. Even though she only caused trouble, they still loved her. Though it was late, she had always wanted to say these words to them. Her brother replied that they knew even without her saying it. Her sister added that she was their family's most precious little sister in the world. The sister said she had worked hard all this time and invited her to come back home with them now. But Nina replied that she couldn't go back now. She couldn't leave her friend Adrian alone. She said she couldn't and wouldn't go back to the era when her brother and sister were still alive, because she had a new home now. Although she didn't know who had shown her this dream, she asked them to reveal themselves now. The dream vanished as if a page had been turned. Two majestic spirits appeared before her, one of fire, the other of ice. Nina asked who they were, and the fire spirit apologized to her. The fire spirit explained that when it briefly inspected her soul, her memories seemed to have gotten mixed up. The fire spirit asked if she was very angry. Nina replied that she was happy to see her sister and brother after so long. The spirit commented that it could directly feel her forgiveness, but Nina wondered to herself who these two were, as they were definitely not human. She wondered if they were the spirits she had summoned and why they felt so familiar. She hesitantly asked them, admitting her question might seem strange. "Have we met before?" She quickly added that she wasn't trying to hit on them or anything, but they just looked really familiar. The ice spirit replied that this was the first time they had met. Nina was surprised, wondering what that meant. Had they not met before? The fire spirit explained that she was truly shocked when she heard her recite the incantation to offer her body and soul. Nina was confused, thinking, wasn't that how it was supposed to be done? The spirit told her that simply trusting them was enough, and that only fallen spirits or other beings would demand such a price. Nina realized that the simplest yet most difficult condition was merely belief. She excitedly asked if this meant she wasn't dead and was completely fine, and if it wouldn't be like one of those cheap plot developments in stories where she couldn't go back after meeting two spirits. The ice spirit simply replied that she wasn't dead, and they had just wanted to see a human who was prepared to offer her soul, so they bent the rules a little. The ice spirit commented that she wasn't listening at all, as Nina was jumping for joy at being alive and full of energy. Nina turned and asked if she could ask one more question. She wanted to know their identities, then rephrased to ask which spirits they were. Nina apologized, saying she really didn't know, but she pointed at the fire spirit and said she could at least guess her identity, as she was the one she had summoned last. Nina realized the fire spirit was that massive, eternally burning flame, the sun. But she pointed at the ice spirit and said she didn't remember summoning him at all, wondering if he had come to the wrong place. The fire spirit said she would give her a hint. She explained that this being was the one who used her former allies, North Wind and Frost, as a shield, which was why he was able to find her before she did. Nina was surprised, thinking that he had used North Wind and Frost as a shield, and a suspicion about his true identity flashed through her mind. So she asked if he was Winter, and the ice spirit confirmed it. Nina understood the situation and apologized for not recognizing them. She suddenly screamed, realizing this wasn't right, because the more concepts a spirit embodied, the higher its rank. Therefore, both the sun and winter were spirits of the highest rank, regarded as deities in folklore. She wondered in amazement how she had managed to summon two beings of this level. The spirits admitted that what she had done was extremely reckless. The sun spirit explained that because a human body couldn't fully withstand her power, many parts of her body had been damaged, and if not for Winter, she would have been burned to the bone. Winter confirmed that fortunately, he had prevented her soul from being damaged, but they told her they had to remodel her body, which wouldn't be easy and would take some time. Nina anxiously wondered just how long some time was coming from the sun and Winter. She thanked them, saying it was fortunate either way, thinking to herself that she didn't know how long she'd have to wait, but if she slacked off like she'd never done before, time would fly by. The sun spirit interrupted her thoughts, saying that in the meantime, she would teach her swordsmanship. She announced that she would teach her personally. She playfully asked if that was a good idea. If it would be boring, adding that, of course, she had no room to refuse. So Nina hesitantly gave an affirmative answer. Nina screamed in shock. The sun's teachings were merciless, and when she was rolling around on the verge of death and collapsing from exhaustion, the sun would restore her to perfect condition, saying she would help her, which instead made Nina wish for death. Nina sighed as she continued her training, saying there was no concept of days here, so she didn't even know how much time had passed. She screamed that this was 1,000 times harder than her life in the Black Knight Nights, and was simply unreasonable. After a long and arduous training, the sun spirit wondered if Nina had reached a level where she was now presentable and wouldn't be an embarrassment. Nina protested and questioned the delay, listing the skills she had learned, from swordsmanship, archery, spearmanship, and magic defense to horseback riding. The sun's response was that her previous skill level was simply abysmal. She told her that as the contractor of the sun and winter, she had to be the best, and that was a given. Nina complained that training someone into a swordsmanship genius was the whole point of a high-level spirit's existence, but she stopped stop when the sun threatened not to tell her the good news if she kept complaining. Nina excitedly asked if there was good news, eagerly inquiring what it was, and the winter spirit confirmed her suspicion. Winter told her that he had kept her waiting for a long time, but announced that her new body was complete. Nina felt immense joy, shouting freedom, while Winter commented that the training must have been too harsh for her to have such a reaction, and the sun lamented that there was still so much she hadn't taught her. Winter explained that when remodeling her body, he had increased its durability, making it much stronger than before, and that the sun had helped a great deal in that regard. But he added that since her body was created under their influence, there would be some changes to her appearance. Nina anxiously wondered if the changes would be so great that others wouldn't recognize her. Winter reassured her that the changes were limited to her eye and hair color, so Nina accepted it, hoping the colors would be pretty. The sun told her one more thing. The flow of time here was different from the human world, and when she opened her eyes, nearly 2 years would have passed since that day. She asked if she was okay with that, and Nina replied that it was actually shorter than she had imagined. She said she was worried because it felt like she had been training for at least 100 years and wondered if 100 years had really passed. Winter silently turned his face away, and Nina wondered in shock if she had really trained for 100 years. The spirits told her that she should go back soon anyway, as everyone would be worried, and they thanked her for her hard work, saying they had enjoyed her company. Nina wondered if she would ever see them again. They replied that they didn't know, but even if they didn't meet, they would always be by her side. They told her to close her eyes and take a deep breath before she left. The sun asked if she was curious about certain things, like the reason she had these memories. Nina replied that she already knew the answer. She said it was obvious that it was so she could meet Adrian. The sun agreed, saying that was the most Nina-like answer. With her eyes closed, Nina asked if it was over and if she could open her eyes now. She slowly opened her eyes. When her eyes were fully open, her appearance had completely changed. Her hair had turned platinum blonde, and her eyes had turned gold. She looked at herself happily, realizing she was really back, and thanked the sun and Winter. She noticed her face had indeed changed. Her hair was Winter's platinum blonde, and her eyes were the sun's gold. She thought about how her previous body had been in poor condition and affected by poison, while this new body looked exceptionally strong. She looked at the barrier that had collapsed 2 years ago and saw the crests of the sun and Winter shining on it, realizing the spirits had sealed it. She complained a little about them, making her suffer for 100 years, but she was grateful because, thanks to them, she was able to save everyone and survive. She thought about the 2 years that had passed, and since the night sky looked exactly the same as that night, it still didn't feel real. She wondered if Adrian had killed all his family members during this time, and reviewed the timeline of events in her head, thinking she was in the phase after the fall of the Night Order, but before he killed his family. She felt it was a terrible family, which was precisely why she didn't want Adrian's hands to be stained with that kind of blood. She shook the thoughts from her head, saying she didn't know what would happen, and it was useless to worry here. Nina decided she had to hurry, as everyone must be waiting for her. She summoned the north wind, praying for the swift steps of Winter, and set off at an astonishing speed. She realized it was the same as the teleportation magic she used before, but much faster now. The speed was so incredible that she could already see the fortress. She noticed the fortress was under attack by a type of flying black monster that resembled an owl. Nina was furious at these disrespectful creatures attacking while everyone was asleep. She looked for anything that could be used as a weapon. She used the power of the wind to leap high into the air. She was surprised by the height she reached, feeling that it was no longer just the spirit's help, but as if they had become one. She prepared to fight, deciding to warm up first. She lunged at one of the monsters and defeated it with ease, then immediately took care of a second one. She sarcastically wondered if that was all they had because it was too easy. She felt that all the suffering of those 100 years was worth it and thanked the sun spirit. Then she decided to quickly finish off the remaining monsters. She looked toward the fortress and saw people still fighting. She guessed they were the Black Knights and assured them she was here to help. She easily dodged another monster's fire attack, saying that dodging an attack of this level was a piece of cake now. Suddenly, the north wind's balance was shaken by the heat, and Nina began to fall. Just then, Adrian appeared and summoned darkness to devour his enemies. Nina was surprised by this kind of spirit magic. Nina fell painfully to the ground. She felt frustrated because she had wanted to make a grand entrance, wondering why things always went wrong. She heard a voice calling her name. She looked up and saw Adrian standing before her in the moonlight. Adrian gazed at her lovingly, overwhelmed with sorrow and consumed by his longing for her. She smiled at him and said she was a little late. Just a moment ago, Adrian had been informed that there was a group of A-rank black monsters near the fortress. He ordered everyone to stay alert, as there were more of them than reported. He realized that at this rate, they would attack the territory, and the three of them had to find a way to handle it. Adrian ordered everyone to focus and not get separated, but he noticed Jean standing there dumbfounded and asked him what he was doing. Jean pointed with a trembling hand toward the sky where Nina was fighting the black monsters. Jean thought to himself, if he wasn't hallucinating, then that person was. Adrian saw her in the sky and whispered her name. After she landed on the ground, Nina sat down wearily and said she was a little late. She chuckled and asked him if 2 years wasn't more than just a little. She thought to herself that her young master had grown up quite a bit, but Adrian suddenly leaped up and hugged her. Adrian held her tightly, trembling, whispering her name, and repeatedly asking how she was. He remembered all the moments that had passed since that day and the thousands of times he had wanted to ask her things. He remembered what she had said when she told him to fulfill his duty, wondering how she could have decided to leave him alone. He held her tighter, muttering incomprehensible words, trying to blame her for taking such a risk. Nina gently caressed his face and called his name. She admitted that she was wrong. Adrian wondered in confusion why she was apologizing to him, what she had done wrong. He firmly cut her off, called her name, and assured her that she was back. He hugged her again, saying that was enough. Jean ran toward them, crying, and hugged Nina tightly, calling her an idiot. Nina laughed and said she was glad to see he was healthy and still as strong as ever. Jean wiped his tears and told her he really thought she was dead. Then Nina greeted Louis, who was standing beside him. Louis smiled and whispered in amazement that she was really the Nina he knew. He asked if she was well and if she was hurt anywhere, so she assured him she was perfectly fine and that he had just seen her fighting. Louis commented that he had seen that reckless manner and that he had a lot to say, to which Nina replied that she regretted it a little too. Louis added that her eye and hair color were concerning and wondered what had happened to her all this time, which made Nina happy, as she had been waiting for someone to ask. She asked for everyone's attention and announced that she would tell them all the amazing things she had been through. But before she could begin, her stomach let out a loud growl, so she cheerfully suggested they eat first. While eating, she told them everything, from her meeting with the high-level spirits, the sun and winter, to the story of enduring over 100 years of harsh training, and even the change in her hair and eye color due to the new body the spirits made for her. Jean commented that it was so absurd it was hard to believe and that he was getting goosebumps. But he added that seeing her eat so heartily, at least she wasn't a ghost, and he had no choice but to believe her. Nina commented while gobbling down her food that she was extremely hungry after all that work. She realized she hadn't eaten or slept in 100 years. She started to feel incredibly sleepy and wondered why she couldn't fight it. Adrian suggested they go to sleep now, as they had to return to the castle tomorrow, and everyone must be tired. Nina complained that she wanted to stay up a little longer, as there was so much she wanted to talk about and find out, but Adrian reminded her that they would be together tomorrow anyway. Nina loved that idea. She suggested they all sleep together, that they could spread out blankets, which made Jean feel like they were at a summer camp, while Louis thought it would indeed be a fond memory. The four of them slept side by side on the floor. As they were falling asleep, Jean asked Louis to increase the food budget now that Nina was back, but Louis flatly refused. Nina listened to them talk, smiling as she remembered that Jean always talked in his sleep. Listening to the familiar voices and laughter, she felt warm, as if they had only been apart since yesterday. But she realized that 2 years had passed. She looked at Adrian's sleeping face and noticed that the boyishness was gone. She noticed how much taller he had grown, and his hands had become so large that she couldn't hold one with just one of hers. She realized that during this time, she hadn't been by his side, but she felt it was okay because she was back now, and she had endured for so long just to return. She decided that from now on, they would always be together. Meanwhile, Adrian noticed her hair had grown very long. He thought about how sad he felt listening to her story, wondering how she had endured that time, and whether she had ever regretted it or thought of giving up. He wondered if she had ever resented him. He wished this moment was a dream, and the past was just a very long nightmare. The next morning, Adrian woke up. He got out of bed and called Nina's name. He searched for her all over the room, calling out to her. He pushed open the door and found Nina standing outside by a window. She cheerfully asked if he was awake. She wished him a good morning. She noticed he was covered in a cold sweat and told him she had come out first because he seemed to be sleeping soundly. She asked with concern if he was all right and if she should get him some warm water. Adrian thought with relief that even after the night had passed, Nina was still here. He answered her calmly, confirming what she said, then called her name and wished her a good morning. Later, as they were riding back, Nina remembered something. She asked Louis why only he, Jean, and Adrian had come to fight the previous night when there were so many black monsters. Wasn't that very dangerous? Louis explained that they wanted to minimize the damage to the territory, so they tried to handle it quickly with a small elite team. But he added that His Grace Adrian's participation was not actually part of the plan, which surprised Nina. She exclaimed loudly, expressing extreme surprise at his use of the term His Grace, and said she couldn't believe it was true. She asked suspiciously if the young master had become the Duke, and Adrian calmly confirmed it to her. Nina congratulated him in confusion, but wondered how that had happened. According to the original story, Adrian was not the next heir to the duchy unless he slaughtered his family and seized the position. Jean explained that the incident was serious and happened the day after the barrier incident, and it was the first time he had seen His Grace so furious. He added that no one expected him to draw his sword in the meeting room, and the old Duke's face had turned deathly pale. Nina was shocked. Fear washed over her as she thought about him drawing his sword, concluding that a terrible massacre had occurred, even though she had hoped to prevent it. She sadly wondered why this had happened while she was away. But Louis quickly reassured her, explaining that Jean was just joking, though he added that it did take a lot of effort for everyone to hold His Grace back that day. Nina thought in shock, so something did happen. Nina directly asked Adrian if he really drew his sword in the conference room, and when she asked what happened after that, Adrian calmly told her that he was kicked out of the ducal residence. Nina wondered what he meant by that. Adrian explained that after he drew his sword, the Royal Guard Knights immediately rushed in, and he thought it was either a choice between everyone dying together or him dying alone. But he ultimately decided to return to the Black Shield Fortress and keep a low profile. He said he remembered the last thing she said to him. He remembered she had told him that it was also his responsibility to live on. Therefore, after returning to the Black Shield Fortress, he reorganized the Black Knights because they couldn't just disappear for no reason. Louis explained that they had faced death several times, and just like the Black Knights before the commander arrived, they really struggled. Then one day, a plague spread throughout the Empire. Nina was surprised, as this was also information she didn't know. She thought to herself that the original story began when the female lead, Fiona, appeared, so there were many hidden parts about Adrian's past, and she didn't know much except for the truly major events. Louis told her that both Duke Laverin and the young Lord Aiden had died in the plague, and now Adrian was the sole legitimate heir. Jean said that what happened next could have been predicted even before the funeral was over. The Duchess joined forces with the Duke's younger brother, claiming that Adrian had poisoned the Duke and the young Lord, and tried to imprison them when they came for the funeral. Nina sarcastically commented that poisoning was their specialty, yet they turned around and accused him of it. Jean agreed. Louis added that this was the beginning of the Laverin family's final war of succession. Thus, the Laverin family's final war of succession broke out, and most of the followers sided with the Duke's younger brother, so it seemed Adrian had no chance of winning. But despite that, Adrian never lost once. In just half a year, he ended everything and became the Duke. Louis admitted that at the time, he felt both admiration and fear. He felt like he was riding on the back of a fierce tiger charging toward destruction. But he added that now, perhaps they could finally relax, because the only person who could restrain that fierce tiger had returned. Nina listened to the whole story in surprise, lamenting that a lot had indeed happened while she was away. She thought to herself that the situation didn't seem as bad as she had feared, because Adrian hadn't directly killed his family, and the Black Knights had ultimately been preserved after all the twists and turns. She was happy because the future she wanted to change was gradually changing, and now they could freely use the wealth and land of the duchy. The hard times were over. When they finally arrived at the Black Shield Fortress, Nina was shocked to see its dilapidated state, and a few servants greeted them at the entrance. Looking at the scene before her, she froze on the spot. She wondered to herself just how poor they were. Kirill suddenly appeared, saying he had rushed over after hearing the news. He approached Nina, noticed she was crying, and asked her why she had that expression. Nina called out to Kirill with tears in her eyes. She cried and hugged him, telling him it had been a long time and asking him what to do about their financial situation. Kirill told her to choose between being happy and crying. Nina told Kirill that she had heard everything on the way here, that the young master had inherited the previous duke's debts, and that the territory was so barren that not even crops could be grown. Nina hugged Kirill, saying he was the only one she could trust now, and asked if her garden was still there, telling him to pick the expensive and fast-growing herbs from it. She suggested planting them on the vacant ducal lands and then selling them. Kirill wondered if the knights hadn't told her the truth. The knights whispered that they were worried she would be too shocked if she knew. Nina wondered what they were muttering about. Jean hesitantly told her that there was no land left. He explained that the previous duke had lost a third of the ducal lands. Nina was shocked, wondering how this could have happened. Louis said he would explain and asked if she knew about the exchange competition. Nina confirmed she knew about the exchange competition held at the Crystal Well between the territories of Count Lava and Duke Lovren. She explained that it was an annual competition against the Lava family to fight for the right to use it. Meanwhile, Louis explained that the Black Knights were excluded from participating every year on the grounds that they couldn't represent the territory. Nina added that all she had heard were stories of their constant defeats and wondered why the topic of the exchange competition was suddenly brought up. Louis told her it was an extension of that matter. They were promised they could reclaim the land use rights if they won, and if they held the land for 10 years, ownership could even be transferred. Hearing this, Nina shouted in anger, questioning why the previous duke would accept such conditions when he kept losing. Louis explained that the duke was in debt to the Lava family and accepted the offer to offset the debt. Nina felt the situation was at a stalemate. Without land, she didn't even know where to begin. She thought about how titles in this empire were determined by fiefs, so the loss of land could lead to them losing the ducal title. She anxiously wondered what to do and what help she could offer at a time like this. Adrian interrupted her, explaining that he had left out one crucial detail. He explained that ownership hadn't been fully transferred yet, and it was now the 8th year, so if they won once within 2 years, they could reclaim the land. Louis commented that this might be true, but Jean regretfully pointed out that their chances of winning were slim due to their lack of numbers. Nina told them to stop for a moment, then realized she was worrying for nothing and suggested they continue drinking. Jean told her it wasn't that simple. They needed to fight in teams of 10, but most people had retired after the Civil War, leaving only a few. He added that Lava's knights had excellent equipment and high morale, but Nina cut him off, saying it didn't matter and confidently affirmed that she would win everything. Louis and Jean commented that if anyone else had said it, they would have thought it impossible, but after seeing her fight yesterday, they felt she was capable of it. Kirill jokingly wondered if her body, made of spirits, was really that strong, expressing a desire to dissect it, which made Nina angrily yell at him. Nina said that resolving one worry made her feel so relaxed that she was about to lose consciousness. Nina mumbled half asleep that she would solve the problem, make money with rare plants, and then gather talented people. Nina assured Adrian that with her around, everything would work out. Adrian smiled in agreement, thinking to himself that she had no choice but to be the commander of the Night Order. Nina smiled in her sleep, confirming that there was no one else but her. She suddenly woke up, confused, wondering what this was about the position of Knight Commander. Adrian asked Louis to bring what he had requested earlier, and Nina wondered what was happening. Louis brought some documents that looked difficult for Nina to read, so Adrian explained that even if it was informal, the procedure was complicated. He then addressed her as Nina Liddell, bestowing upon her the title of Liddell, and announced her appointment as the commander of the Black Knights. Nina screamed in shock and surprise. She wondered why he chose her, and Adrian told her he couldn't remain the commander forever. She protested that there was the vice commander, Louis, but Louis replied that he thought a civil post suited him better and he was happy to give the position to her. Then she thought of Jean, as he was older than her, to which Jean sarcastically replied how he could handle such a headache, but added that if she insisted, he could serve as the vice commander. Nina hesitated, wondering if it was appropriate to make such an important decision so suddenly. Adrian told her it wasn't sudden and that he had been thinking for a long time that she was the only one who could fill the position. Nina felt shy, thinking how she could possibly refuse in the face of a smile like his. She reluctantly agreed, but said she had one question. She asked him if the title he gave her was Radel or Liddell. Everyone wondered if that was really important right now, but she insisted she was curious because if there was a middle name, there must be a fief. Adrian smiled and answered her that her title was, of course, Dell, with the middle name Law and the rank of Viscountess. He explained that it was necessary to do so to keep an elven knight who had returned from the dead and contracted with a high-level spirit. She asked if it was so she wouldn't be looked down upon anywhere, and he agreed. Nina humbly accepted it. She jumped up in excitement, screaming that she was a noble now too, while Kirill complained that she was about to burst his eardrums. Kirill commented that the Black Knights were seen as villains these days and that everyone would be shocked to find out this annoying person was the new commander. Nina wondered why they were called villains, then answered her own question, believing that outsiders saw them as villains who had slaughtered the ducal family and seized the title. Jean agreed. Nina said there was nothing to be done about it, and since they couldn't be heroes anyway, they might as well play the part of villains brilliantly. Jean protested, asking why they couldn't be heroes and suggesting they just do that instead. So Kirill told them to fill their glasses first. They all raised their glasses and toasted to the villainous heroes. Kirill asked Nina to tell them more about the spirits she met, and she enthusiastically replied that she had so much to say they could go for 3 days and 3 nights without sleep. Late that night, Nina woke up. She got up, wondering when she had been moved to her room. She noticed she was wearing strange pajamas and thought someone must have changed her clothes while she was asleep, figuring she must have drunk too much. She felt a headache and wondered what had happened. She suddenly remembered that her name had become Nina Liddell. She thought to herself that it was her first title, a name Adrian had chosen for her. She told herself she liked it very much. She felt she couldn't bear it and suddenly missed him terribly. Elsewhere, Adrian was sitting alone in front of a chessboard. He suddenly stood up and walked toward the room's window. Adrian greeted Nina, who had appeared on his balcony using the wind. Nina asked if he wasn't surprised at all, and he answered her with another question, asking who else would come in through the window besides her. He asked if she couldn't sleep, and she happily replied that she woke up and missed him so much that she came to see him. She noticed the chessboard and wondered if he had been playing chess without sleeping, asking herself if she was disturbing him. He told her she wasn't disturbing him at all and invited her to play, but she apologized, saying she didn't know the rules. She told him to come to her quickly. She lay on his lap and said with a laugh that after so long, she wanted to be pampered like this. She said it felt surprisingly good and told him to try it next time. Adrian told her that this way, he could only see her hair, whereas he wanted to see her face. Nina sat up beside him and said that if he wanted to see her lovely face, then he couldn't be helped. So Adrian said he was deeply honored. She suddenly asked who had changed her into these pajamas. Adrian told her it was Kirill. So Nina asked if the situation was so bad that they didn't even have a single maid. Adrian quickly asked if it was uncomfortable and offered to take care of it himself right away. But she cut him off, saying it wasn't like that, and she was just thinking they could slowly find the right people to fill the vacancies. She said she could handle it because she was Nina Liddell now, and he was busy. Adrian smiled and told her that he actually already had someone in mind. He explained that they had saved some money by tightening their belts. He told her he would give her full authority over the funds and personnel to do as she pleased. Nina jokingly wondered if Adrian trusted her too much. He took her hand and told her that he trusted her. He assured her that he trusted her more than he trusted himself. He leaned in very close to her, so she backed away in confusion, saying he was too close. She awkwardly said the room was a bit hot and asked if they should open the window wider. She thanked him for his trust and promised she would work hard. Adrian told her there was something else he wanted to give her. She wondered what it was. When she opened the box, she found her red hair ribbon, so she asked in shock how he got it. He told her that on the day, he heard she was injured. He went to find her. He found the ribbon on the ground where she had been left. He confessed that he didn't have the courage to tell her, because he was so ashamed that he couldn't protect her. He was sorry she got hurt because of him. Adrian confessed that after she disappeared 2 years ago, he felt immense regret. He had always wanted to one day give her a title and rank, and he should have returned the ribbon to her. There were many things he wanted to do for her, and he didn't want to feel any more regrets. So he decided that from now on, he would say it over and over again. Then he told her that he trusted her because she was a very special person to him. Nina remembered that the Adrian from the original story in her memory was someone who didn't trust anyone. He was known as the most aristocratic Duke of Lavrin, polite and elegant, but no one knew when he might stab you in the back. He had no choice. He was surrounded by enemies with no one to trust. But now they had reached this level of trust. Nina asked if she should give him a gift too, and told him that since he did something good, she would give him a lap pillow as a present. She cheerfully asked who had bullied him while she was away, and she would go teach them all a lesson. Adrian chuckled softly. He asked her who she should teach a lesson of first, saying that a whole night probably wouldn't be enough. He relaxed, lying on her lap. Nina marveled at how handsome he was, saying he was pretty as a child, but had become even more handsome now. She said the woman who gets him would be very lucky, and she remembered when he told her he trusted her. Nina told herself that she didn't want to be the only person Adrian trusted, expressing a wish for his world to expand even wider. She promised him that she would help him so he could see a wider, more beautiful world. Later, Adrian came in with a cup of hot milk, only to find her already asleep. He thought she must be tired, as so much had happened today. He smiled and covered her with a blanket. He remembered that day, the day he thought he had lost Nina for good. He regretted it over and over and swore an oath. He swore that they too would experience the despair of losing everything slowly and unhurriedly, while in hiding, just as he had. He had eliminated the unnecessary elements for the sake of perfect revenge. Now that Nina was back, the followers of the Order would likely start moving again as well. Adrian said to himself that for the sake of his queen, it was necessary to prepare to start his new game. The next morning, Kirill called out to Nina, urging her on, but she told him to wait a moment. Kirill chided her for making such a fuss just to see some herbs, so Nina cheerfully apologized, explaining it was because she drank too much last night and overslept. Once she was ready, she announced she was good to go. When she saw the glass greenhouse, she screamed in admiration. It was truly amazing. She wondered in surprise, was this really a glass greenhouse? She anxiously asked Kirill if the duchy had become poor because of building this expensive greenhouse. Kirill laughed and told her that he had squeezed her young master's money dry. He explained that he had improved and re-improved what he took from her garden, and he would soon commission commoners to mass-produce some of them, on the condition that the duchy would buy all the well-grown herbs. Nina wondered if it was feasible budget-wise, and Kirill replied that it depended on their commander. He pointed at her and said she would get their land back again, right? Nina confidently replied that there was no problem at all. They just had to wait for next month's exchange competition. Kirill said he trusted her. Kirill added that he was also developing new medicines, but it was difficult on his own, and it would be great if someone could help him, but it wasn't easy to find someone willing to do the work. Nina sighed and said it would be nice if someone would come running in excitement just to see her biology reports. She suddenly realized there was such a person. She excitedly told Kirill she knew someone and would contact them. He asked if that person was smart. Nina thought of the great sage of Bluestone Island, the hero of the original story, but of course she couldn't say that. She said she also needed to get Lewis's permission and would tell him after she got a reply. She told Kirill she planned to go to the Violet Forest today. She asked if he needed anything, and he told her what he needed. Then Kirill gave her a huge pile of documents, making Nina scream in surprise, and Kirill told her he should have asked earlier. She wondered why there were so many, and Kirill told her it was because someone had been missing for 2 years, and the work had piled up. Nina thanked him for waiting and gave him a peck on the cheek, which scared him into calling it terrifying and telling her to get out. She left happily. She thought to herself that for the past 2 years, everyone had done their best in their respective positions. Therefore, she couldn't just stand by and do nothing either. In fact, she had a brilliant idea this morning. Besides herbs and bright grass, there was another gold mine hidden in the Violet Forest. She thought to herself that if she could get that, a life of luxury would be just around the corner. She shouted excitedly, telling them to wait and announcing that Nina would inevitably arrive. Jean said he would go too. Nina was surprised by his words. Jean told her that since she said she was going to the Violet Forest to find something, and the rule was to work in pairs, he would go with her. Nina was hesitant at first, saying she would be fine alone, but she quickly changed her mind, excitedly saying that 2 was better and invited him to come along. She told him they might be there for several days, so they should bring extra food. Jean agreed, thinking it was almost like a picnic. Later, Nina called out to Jean, asking if he was done picking herbs, and he replied that he was. Nina noticed that Jean was acting strangely today and wasn't talking much. As the sun was about to set, she asked if he wanted to camp here, and he agreed. Jean told her that from tomorrow, they would be entering deeper than the barrier, a place he had never been before. But he had. Nina asked if he was worried, confirming that it would be dangerous there, but there were things that couldn't be found anywhere else. Jean asked if the spirits had told her these things, and she replied that the spirits told her some things, while Kiro requested others. Jean was silent for a moment. Suddenly, Jean looked up and shouted that he couldn't take it anymore, making Nina wonder what was wrong with him. He placed his hand on his chest and told her to look at him.